Over the course of his presidency, Joe Biden spent 254 days at his beach home in Delaware. We already knew that, of course. We joked about him being perpetually on vacation. He campaigned from his basement in 2020. But that might have more significance now than we thought. What if Joe Biden was MIA so frequently because he was getting treated for cancer? Now we know Biden has been diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer, and cancer is always a tragedy. Who among us has not been touched by it? But two things can be true at the same time. We can have sympathy for the man and his family, and we can wonder, how long have they known? Apparently, this type of cancer is easily detectable at an early stage, like stage 1. So why wasn't it found in Biden? Or was it? I'm not a doctor, but Zeke Emanuel is. He's a highly respected oncologist and was medical advisor to the Biden White House. Roll tape.
Would it be fair to say it's likely to have had this for at least several years?
Oh, more than several years. He did not develop it in the last 100, 200 days. He had it while he was president. He probably had it at the start of his presidency in 2021. Yes, that I don't think there's any disagreement about that.
Biden's cancer is metastatic, meaning it has spread to his bones. It's pretty far gone, but the stats tell us that that's pretty strange. Of the 236,659 cases of prostate cancer in 2021, 70% were diagnosed before the cancer had spread beyond the prostate, and about 8% of those cases were advanced, according to the CDC. Here's urologist Dr. David Schusterman.
This is what I typically would see in a VA hospital, where a patient hasn't had medical attention in 10 years, presents to an emergency room with bone pain, and then they find that it's metastatic prostate cancer. But in the modern age of medicine, especially the fact that he was a former president, he had intensive state-of-the-art care where we can see prostate cancer, 10 years in the past. So this is, it's very unusual to hear that someone has prostate cancer where they're annually being followed up. And the fact that we just find it at a Gleason 9 is just pretty much unheard of in this day and age of medicine.
There's two things to unpack here. A basic blood test called the PSA, the prostate-specific antigen test, can indicate if you have prostate cancer early on. Someone on X wrote, "The blood panel I get every 6 months tracks PSA. There's no way Joe Biden wasn't showing earlier signs of cancer." An oncologist on X wrote, "As an oncologist, I have seen very, very few cases of stage 4 prostate cancer at diagnosis. While anything is of course possible, it's highly unlikely that this would be the way a relatively linear, trackable cancer such as that of the prostate would present in a patient. If it did, it would almost always be in someone who did not have regular contact with the healthcare system. Doubtful that is the case for a lifelong, federal-level politician." If true, we're talking about medical malpractice. If Biden just learned he had cancer very recently, his doctors, who you think would be state-of-the-art, best in the business, because, he's the president, completely neglected to do basic blood testing. But this is where the media cover-up gets worse. First, they're telling us that because this is a terminal disease, not merely dementia and frailty anymore, discussion of Biden's cognitive decline should be off the table. That's suspicious. But also, the media is platforming doctors now who are saying, you guys are reading way too much into this. Like Dr. Celine Gounder, part of the Biden transition team and CBS News medical contributor.
Isn't there a blood test that men can take to know if they have an issue that might warrant further examination?
So there's something that we call a PSA test, but that can also be indicative of many different things. It could just be you have an enlarged prostate. Maybe you have a low-grade infection in the prostate. There are many things that can cause that, and so this is, again, why after a certain age, doctors will typically stop screening for prostate cancer.
Wow.
But in his case, it's not screening. It's important to emphasize this was diagnostic because he had urinary symptoms, and so there was a reason to do more testing.
Okay, so she's saying it's totally normal for the elderly to not be screened for prostate cancer. But what about the President of the United States? We have highly respected doctors here disagreeing with this assessment, saying he's had this cancer for years. Strangely enough, Biden may have actually admitted to that in 2022.
And guess what? The first frost, you know what was happening? It had to put on their windshield wipers to get literally the oil slick off the window. That's why I and so damn many other people I grew up have cancer. And why can't, for the longest time, Delaware had the highest cancer rate in the nation.
The White House, of course, dismissed it as a gaffe at the time. They said, oh, he had skin cancer way back when, nothing to see here. Biden's White House physician, Dr. Kevin O'Connor, just last year told us that Biden was in great health. His February 2024 assessment said, no new concerns. President Biden is a healthy, active, robust 81-year-old male who remains fit to successfully execute the duties of the presidency. Even after the disastrous debate, O'Connor said, as I have written in each of the president's medical reports, as part of the president's annual physical, he sees a team of specialists. In other words, again, nothing to see here. Now, Democratic political operatives are saying that this diagnosis should put the cover-up story to bed out of sensitivity for Biden's family during this trying time, like David Axelrod.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think those conversations are going to happen, but they should be more muted and set aside for now as he's struggling through this.
But even that's not true. Cancer could be a compounding factor for cognitive decline. I speak from experience in my family that chemotherapy can really mess up your brain. You can hallucinate, you become irritable, you can say things that are irrational and that you don't mean. You can forget where and who you are. Again, this is a invasive, brutal chemical cocktail that kills not only cancer cells in your body, but also sometimes your healthy body and the mind in the process. Urologist David Shesterman speaks to this.
Say you get treated for prostate cancer and then the prostate cancer recurs, what you would do is you would start someone on a kind of a testosterone blocking hormone such as Lupron. And because Lupron acts to lower your testosterone, it gives you kind of like symptoms of depression, lower energy, fatigue.
So Biden's symptoms of fatigue, low energy, and sundowning, why he never took a meeting past 4 p.m. and napped very frequently, could now be answered. All right, let's talk about Delaware. 3 years into his presidency, Biden had already spent, again, 254 days at his home in Delaware. National Review's Jeff Blair pointed out it would have been a very dangerous game for the Biden administration to falsify official White House visitor logs. Joe Biden's Delaware abode, meanwhile, has no such legal requirements. Unlike the White House or Camp David, there are no visitor logs for Biden's private home. So hypothetically, if the president were receiving private medical treatment or undergoing evaluations or a meeting with specialists, we wouldn't know. Now, to be fair, there's no confirmed evidence that Biden received cancer treatment in Delaware, but let's be real. If you're trying to conceal a serious health condition from the press, wouldn't you go somewhere that keeps no records? It's not proof of a cover-up, but it is a perfect setup for one. I was on TV this week, and the guest before me argued that Biden's White House doctors likely committed a crime if they hid Biden's cancer from the public. I don't know about that, but I do believe it is a political crime, if true. When you sign up to be president, you are pledging yourself to the country, to public service. Everything that happens to you takes a back seat. You step down the second you can't fulfill those duties properly. Biden started losing it as early as 2020, if not before, which asks the question, were his handlers really just dragging him the whole time to the presidency? And as we've seen throughout history, our politicians, or those close to them, will keep their illnesses under wraps so they can stay in power, even if it degrades their ability to do the job faithfully. Take President Woodrow Wilson. He had a history of strokes, including one that was so severe it left him incapacitated until the end of his presidency. A cover-up began, led by his wife, Edith, and the White House doctor. They decided not to tell Wilson how serious his condition was. Some people are asking if the same thing happened to Biden with his team. Wilson's cabinet showed concern, but the doctor refused to sign a disability notice and didn't want to notify the public. Historians are pretty sure it's because his wife, Edith, said not to. When FDR won his first term in 1932, many Americans were also unaware that he was literally in a wheelchair. He designed a wheelchair from a kitchen chair that was smaller in size than standard models of that era, so it wouldn't appear in any off-guard photos. The desk that FDR gave addresses from hid that he was paralyzed from the waist down. With the help of braces, crutches, and the steady arm of one of his sons, FDR even figured out how to simulate walking. FDR's White House doctor told the public that the president's chief worries were sinus problems. Funny enough, McIntyre received this assignment on the recommendation of Carrie Grayson, the doctor who treated Woodrow Wilson. Then there's JFK, who is believed to have suffered from adrenal problems as well as back pain, osteoporosis, colitis, a lot of other issues, all managed with medications, kept largely hidden from the public. JFK was ingesting cortisone via oral pill daily. He received energy formula injections throughout his presidency from another doctor who was nicknamed Dr. Feelgood. The Kennedy family and advisors concealed his illnesses to maintain his public image of youth and vigor, because if he didn't portray that, it could jeopardize his career. So what does history show? White House doctors have misguided Americans on the health of our presidents in the past. First ladies have directed the doctors and the cabinets to keep quiet regarding their husband's sicknesses. So without social media, mass public deception was a lot easier. It's not anymore. Joe Biden can't hide what he was going through, even if the media calls that cheap fakes. Americans have a right to more disclosure. Is their president capable of doing the job? For years, media figures shielded the president's condition. You had Morning Joe telling viewers that Biden was doing jumping jacks in his sleep.
He's far beyond cogent. In fact, I think he's better than he's ever been. Intellectually, analytically, because he's been around for 50 years. And, you know, I don't know if people know this or not, Biden used to be a hothead. This version of Biden, intellectually, analytically, is the best Biden ever.
Now with Jake Tapper's book, Original Sin, they're retroactively admitting what critics long suspected. And that book is just a cultural permission slip. Let's get real. If Biden had late-stage cancer for years, then it's fair to ask who was actually running the country. And if someone, a doctor, a family member, anyone else, knew it wasn't just a medical secret, that was a national security threat. So what do we do now? As Kurt Schlichter writes in Town Hall, America was on autopilot for 4 years. That's a pretty good case for a congressional investigation with the whole 9 yards, subpoenas, depositions, public hearings. Meanwhile, Biden pardoned nearly every member of his family on the way out. Everyone but Jill, that is. Our editors here at NR said, ultimately, this latest episode serves as a stark reminder that once trust is lost, it is nigh on impossible to regain. In the latter part of Joe Biden's single term, the Democratic establishment made it clear that it was willing to hide all manner of problems with its president in order to keep its grip on power. For years, Biden's team lied and distracted and misled and obfuscated and attacked anyone and everyone who declined to follow suit. That those who are in the midst of reading about this deception will have questions about the veracity of those figures' latest declaration is not a problem, or an indignity or a sign of an ugly culture. It is the most natural thing in the world. The left loves to say democracy dies in darkness. If a sitting president is too sick to lead, the people deserve to know. Not years later, when the damage is already done. As I mentioned, Jake Tapper, all these other so-called journalists are cashing in on the scandal now that it's politically safe to do so. For more on that whole side of the scandal and cover-up, click here.